Hello there beautiful, how are you today? Welcome to another Should You Pull video for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. Now in today's video we're going to be covering a character that a lot of players have been very excited to see finally become really strong in Zell, and he's going to be accompanying Xande on his lost chapter, and Xande's going to be getting some updates as well. And we obviously have a Lufenia to cover. Now this is obviously a time where a lot of players are saving, but Zell's definitely not one to be counted out because I've made that mistake myself. So if you'd like to find out more about Zell and Xande and the event, then stay tuned and keep on watching. Of course, don't forget to check out all of my social media links down below, including Twitch, where you can find me streaming all the time these days, whether it be Dissidia, FF14 or otherwise, and also on Patreon, where you can get lots of benefits if you'd like to support the channel further. And one of those benefits is that I shout out one of my patrons every time I release a video, and today that person is going to be Fair, who has recently just upgraded their Patreon so that they could have a animated title card like all the ones I put at the end of my videos, and their favourite character is Seymour, so it's lovely to be able to make these title cards for my patrons. And a massive thank you goes out to you, Fair, and of course all of my other patrons, as without you I wouldn't be able to keep this channel running at the frequency at which I do. Of course, don't forget to check out all the other content creators for Dissidia, and of course all the other resources that are related to the game as well. So as we always do with these videos, let's take a look at the banner and what's featured on there and what they kind of do. And so this is obviously Xande's lost chapter, so it features Xande's full kit, but it also features Zell's brand new LD, and it will also be another chance for you to get hold of X-Death's BT if you haven't pulled already for him, and Ico EX is there to round everything out for Chaos Challenge purposes. Now Xande typically before now was, I mean, he's still very much the same. He is a AoE based damage dealer who relies on a stack based buff called Circus Tower that gets upgraded every time he uses either his skill 1 Libra combo, which isn't a particularly strong attack, or his LD. And his LD actually is quite strong, or it always was, and the main gimmick when it came to his damage dealing is that the more you used his EX, the more another stacking buff would come about that would make it a faster recast rate and make the attack hit harder. And as long as he had 3 out of the 5 Circus Tower buffs, as long as you have his full kit, then you'd be able to use upgraded versions of his skill 2, which had multiple HP dumps in it. Not only that, but as long as you have 4 or more stacks of his Circus Tower buff, you'll have Dark Enchant for the entire party. And Xande's actually the only character that can do that. And then every other level of Circus Tower increases the amount of splash damage he does with his various attacks. And he's okay, he's not too bad, his damage is alright, but the trouble with Xande is that he'd have to get to 5 stacks of his Circus Tower buff by using a fairly lackluster attack or his LD in order to get those stacks as quickly as possible. And then he kind of just did okay-ish damage, like he wasn't on the level of your, like, he's never been that fantastic, but now he's like way behind in comparison to your Vans, your Tifas, etc. So the Dark Enchant and Imperil is pretty much the only thing he really had going for him outside of what is realistically a damage dealing kit. Well, that's still the same with his LD boards and his new LD call, but he's a lot better at it. So Destruction Quagga, which is his LD attack, now has 3 HP dumps in it, which is really good, but it also gives him an additional stack of Circus Tower, where it would originally only give him 1, now it gives him 2, and he starts with 1 thanks to his EX buff, etc. So you actually only really need to use Circus Tower, or you only really need to get the Circus Tower by using maybe Libra combo twice and a copy of Destruction Quagga, which means that you're getting a lot more uses out of his LD attack, which is significantly stronger. And as long as he has his Circus Tower buff, his crit damage goes up, his HP damage dealt goes up, and his elemental weakness damage goes up. So while it's not huge, like there's not an awful lot that's getting added to him, the bits that are added do help him kind of elevate himself to where he should be in terms of damage. His Quagga, his skill 2, has 2 HP dumps in it. His Meteor, his EX, has multiple HP dumps in it, and so does his LD. So his damage as an AoE damage dealer isn't terrible, like not at all. And obviously he has that unique Dark Enchant and Imperil, but outside of his event, you're not really going to need Dark Enchant all that frequently. I mean, I'm of the opinion that it's always nice to have an enchanter for every element, so I actually do have Xander, but I'll be honest, I've barely used him, and I don't see that really changing going forwards either. I mean, I'll use him for his own event because it makes his own event significantly easier, but past that, I think that he's quite superfluous in his use. Like, there are dark-based characters like Leon, Dark Knight Cecil even. You know, there are other characters that rely on the dark element a bit more, and Xander, while being a adequate damage dealer, I don't think is somebody that people should be rushing out to go and get. In terms of call abilities, etc., Xander's call abilities are fairly typical for a Enchant Imperil based character in that Libra combo inflicts the Imperil by giving the Apprehension of Weakness debuff, which doesn't actually just imperil Dark, it imperils Fire and Earth as well, because they, like, a lot of his abilities have two elements, like his skill 1 is Fire and Dark, his skill 2, or the rest of his skills, are Earth and Dark, so that means that you're capitalizing on that as well. But that obviously can be a double-edged sword when it comes to his kit in general, because if an enemy absorbs any one of those elements, then it can prove problematic for Xander going forward. But he does a AoE, Bravery, single target HP and splash damage HP attack, which is very much what his skill 1 does, and it inflicts the Imperil, whereas his LD call ability gives party enchant and elemental weakness damage and crit damage to the party, and it does a pretty hefty Earth and Dark 3 HP dumping attack as well. I think this is nice to have. I definitely think that if you're not wanting to use Xander, like, particularly often, having access to a party-wide elemental enchant is always quite handy. Like, I quite like using this on characters that that are quite slow and like to use, like, off-turn damage. For example, Yang, someone who attacks fairly often without actually taking turns off of the counter from the call ability. Like, that can be quite nice. It doesn't last the longest time in the world, but the fact that you get a rebreak from his LD, which is something you actually do get from his LD anyway, is a nice added bonus on top of the fact that you're getting the Imperil and Enchant, so that is a nice thing to have when it comes to Xander. In terms of his armor, he's got Attack Keystone, which, given that he doesn't have a huge amount of bravery hits in a lot of his moves and does have quite frequent HP dumps, I could see an argument for taking this so that you've got access to that extra bravery damage, but his HA plus is a 20% buff for both his HP and his bravery damage caps, so I don't think that this is one that you'll realistically need to use, because the thing that I'm not such a fan of about Xander is the same. Like, I liken him to Kryl, for example. Kryl is also a Enchant Imperil based character, as is the likes of Kurasame, and they tend to bring stuff to the table outside of their Enchant and Imperil, and Xander just does damage. Like, he doesn't really have an awful lot of support capabilities or anything that he adds to the party outside of damage and the fact that he is an Enchant Imperiler for a rare element. So I think that if you've got other elements covered and you can deal with this particular event in dark damage, then I don't think you really need to go for Xander. Like, I think he's got a bright future. Like, when his C90 comes around, he gets significantly better, but you could always pull for him then if you really wanted to, whereas in this point in time where we're saving for the next era, I think that Xander, while not bad, is certainly not someone I would consider a high priority. Okay, so Zell is who we're going to talk about now, and I'll tell you the truth, I've been dreading making this video on Zell because Zell is complicated, and like in a nice way, because Zell is complicated in a way where he's gotten reworks, his LD makes a big difference, but he's always been fairly complex in terms of how he deals damage, when realistically Zell is a damage dealer, but with his rework and his LD, he actually does a lot of damage in a lot of hits very frequently, and he does carve himself out a bit more of a niche than he had before, which definitely elevates him to LD worthy damage dealers at this point in time. Now, I wrote Zell off, I'll be honest, I did. I wrote Zell off, but I was wrong to do so. He is actually really quite powerful if used correctly. So, when using Zell, you have two different moves to begin with. You can see how far we're going to go by scrolling through all these moves. Punch Rush and Booyah. Now, whichever one of these you use, he actually triggers the other one straight after. So you actually get multiple Brave HP dumped straight off the bat just by using multiples of his moves. Once he's used those moves or his EX, he then gets the dual buff. Now, the dual buff changes his Punch Rush into Burning Rave and his Booyah into Meteor Barrage. Now, the difference between starting with Punch Rush and then Booyah is the difference in which you want to actually activate your speed. So Punch Rush now has an instant turn activated because of the fact that it's now been changed for the rework. So it's now completely free turn, doesn't add to total turn count, nothing. Doesn't consume your ability usage either, which is huge. And then Booyah doesn't do that, but it still doesn't consume the ability usage and add to the turn count, but it's a high turn rate rather than an instant one. So if you want to, you can give your party members time to do what they need to do. Now, when you use Burning Rave and Meteor Barrage, this is quite simply different in the sense that Burning Rave is an AoE Brave HP attack, which is now 100% splash damage thanks to the rework that he's gotten. And then Meteor Barrage is a multi-HP dumping attack on a single target. So if you want to do it that way, if you're focusing on one enemy or multiple, you can actually go either way with him. He also has more of a recast rate when using his Punch Rush as well, which means that you can charge his EX up more nicely. And Zell's EX actually changes his HP and Bravery Plus into Burning Combo and Meteor Combo, which are a combination of Punch Rush and then Burning Rave. So again, wanting to use AoE damage, you're going to want to go for that one. And then Meteor Combo, which is Booyah and then Meteor Barrage, which obviously does a large number of attacks on a single target. Booyah is also or Meteor Barrage is randomly a thunder-based move. I guess that it's flavorful to his kit, but it does it's something that's noteworthy. It shouldn't really affect anything, but in terms of elemental resistances, it's something to keep in mind because he doesn't imperil thunder or anything like that. So now that we've gone through those and his EX, etc., like I said, he's got a lot of different moves that come up. His C65 actually augments his duel, gives him duel if you want to use that. And the other thing to bear in mind with duel as well is that it increases his attack by 50% as well as giving him Burning Rave and Meteor Barrage. So you may not necessarily want to use Burning Rave or Meteor Barrage straight away, particularly if you're about to use the LD or the attack that comes off of it, so that you can benefit from that extra attack. Now, Maximum Duel. Maximum Duel is weird, but in a good way. So what this does is it actually doesn't take up a single use of itself the first time you use it, which is very strange. It's a 3-hit Brave HP, 4-hit Brave HP, 5-hit Brave HP, so it is then a multi-HP dumping attack itself. It extends all of his buffs by 4 turns, so he's got loads going on with his buffs that he already has, so whether he gets his typical offensive buff from Balaam's Rowdy Child, or whatever it was called, so that he gets more attack and bravery all off the bat, and he also gets Lightspeed Special. Now, Lightspeed Special is very strange in that it builds up into stack-wise every time Zell does anything, and when it hits 4, you then can only use his LD attack again, at which point you'll then use the skill usage as My Final Heaven, which is a duplicate of a big hitting move that he's just done to enter this mode. So the best way to kind of think about it is that he kind of has like a mini burst phase of his own, because what the stacks actually do is they give him the ability to have instant turn rate and additional turns that don't add to the turn count, and they also, much like Lightning and characters like her, when he breaks an enemy, he gets a free turn afterwards. So for the next couple of turns he's going to be able to do a large amount of damage very quickly. And quite handily, while you're using all of these moves, he now re-breaks everything with all of his moves whenever he's using any attacks and stuff. So he's going to get those moves off very, very rapidly, and you're going to be able to deal a lot of damage in a very short space of time. And he gets Brave and HP damage up while he's building up to My Final Heaven, and then My Final Heaven itself is a big fat multi-HP dumping attack that then changes him back to his regular sort of, it changes the LD back to Maximum Duel, so that if you wanted to go off again, then you'd be able to go off with your re-breaks and getting My Final Heaven back. the best way to look at Zell is like a halfway point between, I want to say, Aranea, because of the re-break thing that he has on every move he does while he's in his LD mode, as it were. And Tifa, just on the back of the fact that he hits things very quick and very hard, like, because he's got multiple HP dumps in practically all of his moves. And he also has a really nice, I did fail to mention as well, that with Booyah, which you will get whether you start with Punch Rush or Booyah, it gives a 60% defense drop, which is actually really nice given the kind of kit that he has. He, like, ultimately, he is just a damage dealer, but we've seen with characters like Tifa, etc., that being just a damage dealer isn't necessarily a bad thing if you're doing a lot of it and you're doing it very quickly. Now, I don't think that Zell is quite on the level of Tifa in terms of groundbreaking, unbelievable, like, bustedness, but I definitely don't think he should be written off. Like, I think that he's a character that has a bright future ahead of him in his C90 when he gets that, because that improves his EX and his C65 quite substantially. But because of that, I think that that's probably a better time to be pulling for Zell, purely because we're saving up for new eras, making choices on things that we want, things that we need, and, you know, being able to round things out. And a damage dealer's role is the one that's quite often the most easily replaced. So if you've got really strong damage dealers like Vaughn or Tifa or all sorts of different characters that do, like, a lot of damage in a short space of time, then I don't feel that you need Zell. If you like Zell, you're going to be very impressed with what his LD brings to the table. I'm not personally particularly fussed by him because I do have a large array of damage dealers, but I definitely don't think that he is one to be underestimated, and I definitely fell criminal to underestimating him, and having watched it back and having a real deep dive into what Zell does, I actually think that what he can do can be very impressive. The other nice thing when it comes to him having his LD as well is that the dual buff itself actually gets augmented as well. So again, this comes back to, do you necessarily want to dispel his dual buff by using things like Meteor Barrage, etc., when it gives him HP damage dealt up and crit damage increased by 50%? That's another thing that's worth noting. When it comes to Zell's call abilities, his call abilities are, you know, they're not the first thing that I would think of for him, because but he does do the defense down, and, you know, that's a nice thing for him to have. And then seriously after that, it's just a typical hard-hitting move. Again, if you have the likes of Tifa, then you're probably not going to need to have Zell, because obviously her LD call does 7 HP dumps, where Zell's only does 3, as if that's a small number. But he does have a large amount of bravery hits, and he does hit pretty hard as well. So if you wanted to, you could use Zell's call abilities for damage, because of the fact that he brings the large defense down with his regular call. In terms of his high armor, he has attack keystone, because of course he does, and then he has the full 30% for his bravery cap, and then 10% for his HP cap. And again, much like a lot of characters that have large numbers of brave dumps, we recently spoke about this with Lion and with Tidus as well, then you can make use of this if it's a character you think you're going to use a lot. And damage dealers are typically the 10 types of characters I tend to use my ingots and stuff on regularly. I mean, even though Zell's not a character I'm particularly going in on, those people that like to use him, I don't think it would be a waste for them to go in, or to go all in on him if they want to use him a lot, because the more you can put into him, the more you're going to get out of him. Now, like I said, Zell and Xande realistically are damage dealers first and foremost. Yes, they have their niches. Like, Zell works very well with characters like Core or Setzer, because he takes a lot of turns, but he doesn't take so many that he's gonna burn through those buffs super quickly, like Terra or Tidus even. Characters like that. Zell just likes to double up on his turns, because of the fact that, like Lightning and other characters like him, when he breaks an enemy and gets that free turn, during that free turn he can't then get another one. So the fact that he can't do, unless you use a C65 skill or something along those lines in order to make it so that you can just take another turn. So he doubles up on his turns, but he doesn't take so many that he's going to burn through buffs of party members really quickly. So if you're using characters like Core, I think Core and Zell would be an absolutely fabulous pairing. And honestly, I think that he's definitely one that I've been very guilty of slipping under the radar, and I don't think that that's necessarily fair on him, because he does do a lot of damage very quickly. He has a lot of very like high damage dealing attacks that he can burn through. He has defense ignoring in his EX as well. I completely forgot to mention that. There's a lot to like about Zell, but he, being a damage dealer, is in that position where there are a lot of damage dealers in this game, and therefore it's the most easily replaced role. So if you have a lot of damage dealers, you really don't need to go in for Zell. However, if you like damage dealers and you like seeing numbers flying left, right and center, I think you'd be pleasantly surprised by Zell's LD. So now let's take a quick look at the event that comes along with Xande and Zell and see whether you need either of these characters to push through it, or what characters you could take if you don't necessarily want to pull here. So we're going to be fighting a two-wave Lufenia fight, which is quite unusual by today's standards, but it's something that we'll see more of going forwards. And the first wave is just a typical, like, it's the Ochus, they summon ads, they do occasional debuffs and things like that, but past that, it's a very standard fight. As long as you're hitting hard, it's nothing. But then the second wave is the Assault Dog. So we fought these before in Xande's original event, and their main gimmick is the fact that they put up a Brave Shield that they want to take elemental weakness damage from, so that they can't, because they can't take HP damage while the shield is up. So you typically want to bring Xande or an Enchant Imperial unit in order to cater to that. Now, the orb on this asks for inflicting breaks, so re-breaks are a thing because that's Zell's new thing, and also want dark damage dealt to them. So you can take Xande because each of these only adds 1 to the orb, so obviously you're going to need to be keeping on top of these as much as possible. Now, to tell you the truth, when I've done all my research, the most common strategy that I see when it comes to this particular event is to have either Xande or Yang carrying something like Golbez LD Call or Xande LD Call to make it so that he's dealing dark damage on off turns, then to take like Terror and just like continually do damage, throw damage out. You throw X Death in there as well for the extra damage, or Cloud of Darkness. You're typically just going to see like 0 boss turn clears. Tidus with his BT does very well with this as well because every other turn he gets a re-break. Cloud of Darkness obviously works really well. Setsa's obviously going to do really well here as well because like the fact that they put these palings up means that you're going to be able to deal damage to them quickly even if you don't have the elemental weakness damage. And Varn does well here as well just by being a massive damage dealer. Sephiroth is actually a really good shout here as well because of his ability to, or his BT ability to make it so that you get the re-break every turn. Like if you wanted to replace Yang with a friend like Sephiroth BT unit or something like that, and then make it so that you're re-breaking every turn with your terrors or what have you instead of doing elemental weakness damage, you're still going to be able to keep that orb up. Now the orb actually only appears between 180% and then 60% to 0, so typically you kind of play it fairly safe with the first bit and you just make sure you're getting your re-breaks, you're getting like elemental damage. Like I've seen you know, launch teams work really well here because Dark Knight Cecil happens to do dark damage as well, so that's an option for you. You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can clear this. Just make sure that you're carrying the correct call abilities, or somebody that re-breaks on the regular, or somebody that basically makes it so they don't get a turn and then making it so that you have dark damage available to you. There are options that will allow you to get past the orb, and past that, honestly, it's just a case of stopping them from getting a turn in the first place. So now, of course, let's ask the big question as to whether we should be pulling on Zell and Xande's banner. Now, I'm sure that there are going to be a lot of people that probably disagree with me on this, but I am not going to be pulling for Zell. Because while I think he is a really cool damage dealer, and I think it's great to see such a glow up for Zell with his LD and his rework, I am of the opinion that damage dealers are the most frequently released characters and therefore the most likely to be able to replace in the future. So for example, like if you have Tidus, who is a turn-hogging character that has a decent defense buff, does a lot of damage with a high turn rate and happens to do re-breaks fairly often, Zell kind of covers a lot of the same stuff that Tidus does. So if you really like Zell, you're definitely going to get a lot of mileage out of him. I mean, if you like all of that stuff and you really like Final Fantasy VIII and Zell in particular, then he is the legend, he is the icon, he is the moment. But I do think that because there are a lot of characters going forward as well, being damage dealers, high turn rate type deals. Zidane is another option that's got a slightly similar vibe, even if it is quite different. But damage dealers do come and go very quickly. Now, Zell does have a really good future going forward with his C90 and his EX rework, etc. But you could always pull for him then, and that banner is arguably a lot better than this one because Xande, well, Xande's just kind of there. Now, yes, he has gotten a lot better. Him being able to ramp up his Circus Tower buff faster is really good for him because it saves LD uses for raw damage. But Xande, for all of his quirks and complications with his stack buffs, doesn't actually do a lot. Like, he has damage, AoE damage, which is strong. It's good. It's not fantastic. And he has the Dark Enchant Imperil. And that Dark Enchant Imperil is the only thing, really, that sets him apart from other characters. And even then, it's only because it's dark. It's not because it's an Enchant Imperil, because we have a lot of Enchant Imperil characters. And while I think it's great to have, like, access to every element with that, Xande's a character that I just wouldn't chase for that alone at this point in time. I think that if you already have him, great, you'll be able to use him again. I have Xande because I was chasing Cloud BT when it first came out, so I already have Xande. But, you know, and I'll probably use him for his event because it makes his event a lot easier, and, you know, maybe that's kind of it. Like, he's definitely a character I regret having pulled for in the past purely for the fact that he's not the first character that I would go to when it came to doing any kind of hard content. And those of you who feel differently, absolutely, by all means. Like, Zell is a great character now. Like, for those of you who've been looking forward to him getting his glow up, he's got it. And he really does sort of shine in a lot of situations. But I do think that a lot of characters can do similar things to him in a different, like, in light that we've already seen and had. And obviously with his C90 coming, he might be better off pulled for there. And then, of course, finally, we have Would You Pull, which is the section of the video where my beautiful patrons and all you viewers get your chance to let your voice be heard and let everyone know whether you would or wouldn't pull on a banner and why. Now, this banner is weird. Now, going through all of my comments, massive thank you again to my patrons for doing so, people either don't care about Zell at all or are all over this hot dog guzzling boxer and want him before anything else, which is a very, very interesting dichotomy. So I'm going to go straight into numbers. So 18% of people said they were going to use gems here, 35% of people said they were going to use over 100 tickets, 18% of people said they were going to use less than 100 tickets, and 29% of people said no. It's a really weird and interesting banner because it does feel like there are two massively differing camps here. People are, like I said, they either love him or they hate him. People aren't pulling here for Xande, I will say that now. People are either pulling for Zell or they are not pulling pretty much at all. So I'm obviously in the camp that doesn't particularly care about Zell. It doesn't help that he's not my kind of playstyle either. The turn-hogging characters don't typically do a lot for me. I'm somebody who's a big fan of off-turn damage instead, but because it means that the enemies can interact and, you know, this, that, and the other. But a lot of people do like that playstyle, so we'll go into some of the comments. Boopar Wiggum, for example, says, I have Xande and Zell comes back again in the future on a decent banner, so my head tells me this is an obvious skip. But Zell is one of my all-time FF favourites, so the heart wins. I'm going straight to gems and I'm going to have an absolute blast using this champion chicken whisk wherever I can. Can't wait, haven't been this excited since Guy's initial release. So, if he's a favourite of yours, you're absolutely going to like what he does. Like, there's no two ways about it. I'm just very, like, I try to look at things with as little bias as possible. Like, I've even told people not to pull on some of my favourite characters in the past, like Kuja. And I try to look at things objectively, but being real, objectivity doesn't matter. Like, if you like a character, just pull for them, because you're going to like them regardless of any other factors. So then we're going into Cobalt Zork's comment, who says, I have Xande's kit unbuilt. He sat on the bench with Kieran and Guy's character, kind of picked up by accident and just never got round to building, due to general apathy. Zell is honestly just kind of the same. He doesn't hold any excitement, and that's damning in this business. I may get around to building Xande as he's there, but I'm fresh out of ingots after purpling Tidus, Eunice, Setzer, Yuffie, and a couple of others in quick succession. So I'd need to book random trash EXs to build him, which just seems like a lot of effort. I mean, if he doesn't excite you, this is the thing. With a character like Zell, with a damage dealer, you will be able to just pick and choose your favourites, because by and large, as long as they're dealing large amounts of damage, they're doing their job correctly. Zell does that job correctly. Other characters also do that job correctly, so you're going to be able to pick and choose based on your preferences. Pale Raider says 100% gemming this. Would you like a damage dealer with re-break in their kit like Tidus but doesn't want to wait till he lines up the right shot? Would you like a damage dealer who can delay not through attack but by game mechanic, making it so even less bosses can escape your high octane shenanigans, all at a reasonable investment price and with bonus debuffs to boot? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then Zell is the man with your plan. With a very bright C90 ahead of him, can you go wrong? Not in my opinion. Some people talk about the thunder element including one of his skills, but that could be as useful or useless as you want it to be. Will it make it anything different to anything he does? More than likely no, but it's nice to at least have something to worry about. I have Xande LD and I'm still going ham here in hopes of picking up X-Death BT along the way. Zell's mini BT dual phase is just that, mini, but it's not a BT, and he gets 4 uses of it. So you can bring your X-Death's cores and Cloud of Darknesses and just let rip with the damage. So, again, can you see this major sort of like swing in attitude when it comes to Zell? People either love him or they don't care about him, and Pale Raider obviously really cares about him. The Thunder thing, I don't think it really makes a huge amount of difference. Like, you know, yes, you're going to have to keep attention to it when it comes to that. Like, when it comes to just checking resistances and things like that, because he doesn't have a Thunder Imperil attached to him. But Beatrix is coming up in the near future, and she does. And she's got a lovely, you know, kit to go along with the likes of Zell as well. So, you know, there are ways around that. But, like, I do agree that if you want to pair a damage dealer up with somebody like X-Death, Core, Cloud of Darkness, off-turn damage, then having lots of turns does play well into that. And the irony is that I really enjoy off-turn damage but don't enjoy turn hoggers. I like trap-based characters. So, like, there's lots of little nuance, but that's half the fun of the game. So just bear that in mind as you go, whether you want to pull for Zell or not. Neo Anima finally says, a skip for me. I already have Xande LD, absolute godsend against Alexander, and even though Zell seems fun to play, he could be picked up on a better banner in the future, and I already have plenty of rebreakers and turn hoggers. I'm in very much the same position as Neo Anima here, and I actually would quite like Zell. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I would quite like to have access to him, but I just don't. Like, there's got to be some banners in which we're not pulling, and I've done a lot of pulling well, not recently, but since Yuna's batch, I've done a lot of pulls, and so X-Death's batch, I don't want to pull loads. So I feel like for me, it's prudent to be cautious, but obviously what my needs are not going to be the same as yours. So definitely cater to your own needs before looking at either my videos or anyone else's to tell you what to do. So that's going to be all for today's video. A massive thank you goes out to all of you for watching. Let me know in the comments below whether you're going to be pulling for Zell and Xande, as it seems like a very contentious deal. Like, some people absolutely love him and others just do not care. So it's very interesting to see what a big difference there is all around one particular character. Are you pulling for him because he was always categorized as not very good and now he's getting a lot better? Are you pulling for him because of your fandom towards him or FF8? Or are you just kind of like, I'm happy to move on? Let me know in the comments below. Obviously, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notification for any future videos I might be making, and leave that thumbs up as well. And I will see you guys next time. So thank you all very much for joining me, and I'll see you then. Take care.